Like It Is debuted 2 months after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968. Actor, film director, and political activist Danny Glover recently visited our studio to reflect on a show that he says was an important part of the civil rights movement.
When we look at 4 decades, more than 4 decades, and the period of time, the arc of the period of time, politically in this country, socially in this country, the changes that happened in this country, in that sense, and there's Gil chronicling it, keeping a record of it, you know, archiving it, and that's so important for Martin, Malcolm. You can go on. You can go on for all the things that happened during that period of time. That's why it's important for me, because I grew up during that time. That period of the time was a period of my own maturations, you know, as a young child in the civil rights movement, watching the civil rights movement from afar in San Francisco, and yet identifying it with because my mother's from the Deep South. From that moment on, watching that and seeing that the progress, there's context and continuity over a period of time. And often in life, and often in our own social history, there's not the kind of context that brings us, that allows us to see and remember, you know, remember this movement, and remember particularly because it may have been individuals that Gil gave a platform to, but it was a movement of ideas and people, and this was important, you know.
I agree that the march was a significant event, but I think the purpose in this program is to try to raise the question as to whether or not it really ventilated the full scope of black feelings and our grievances and opinions.
When I met Edward Said, a great friend of mine, and turned out to be someone else, a great writer, Palestinian, and the first time that he saw me was on Gil Noble's show. And then what he did was he contacted someone he knew and said, do you know who this was? So he heard me talking about Paul Robeson on Gil Noble's show. You know, where else can you talk about Paul Robeson in the context of all the things that had happened over the last 40 years that left this place on the show? It was unlike any other show that I remember that aired constantly over that period of time in the country.
They suggested that when I was abroad, I spoke out against injustices to the Negro people in the United States. I certainly did.
It was a conversation about what was actually. It was a conversation of, and virtually conversation about ideas, about a movement of people, and that's where you got it from. And I think it was essential. Then there's specific shows that I remember as well. I remember the show that he did, and it must have been I was shooting Beloved 1997. And I was in New York. I just happened to be in New York on that Sunday, going somewhere else. And I remember the show he did on these tapes. There's of Martin Luther King. And it's almost as if I saw the show yesterday, where Martin is just before as he was preparing and organizing for the Poor People's March, as he went from and talked to sharecroppers, and this photographer, this filmmaker, recorded this never seen before. And I'm looking at this moment, and I'm looking at King's eyes in that moment, and I'm looking at the passion, and I'm looking at him listening to people. King was a great listener, and this guy captured that. And I remember I was so moved by that show, so moved. I ended up sitting in front of the television crying as I heard that moment, because it was only 2 weeks later that he was assassinated. And I called Gil up, man. I said, man, I don't know what that show was, something special, you know, and you understood. Now we hit 97, we're basically we're almost 30 years after King's assassination. With 97, almost 30, he said, yeah, man, he was the real deal. There wasn't a funny bone in his body. And that comes from an intimacy with somebody and knowing somebody, and they'll be able to separate, you know, the pretenders and the real deal. There's something about the word "like it is," you know what I'm saying? There's something about that "like it is," you know. You can take it lightly, you know, and you can say it's one of those kind of like throw-off terms, but Gil brought new meaning Gil brought new meaning to Like It Is.
Today in Washington, D.C., President Obama dedicates a memorial to the life and the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King was one of Gil Noble's heroes who dedicated his life to the less fortunate, the unknown, and even the forgotten. Recently, Reverend Al Sharpton told us how Like It Is was an integral part of the movement from the very beginning.
I think Like It Is was extremely important. It gave black New Yorkers a voice. It gave us a way to tell our story in a way that no other outlet could. When Gil started the show, it was not something that you would see on mainstream television. So even though we had access to black radio, most black radio was not listened to by whites or even the majority of blacks. So Gil put in your homes on a weekly basis the black experience, no matter what it was, and he would cover those that people had never heard of, and those that were known but that you never knew that side of. I knew Gil from when I was a teenager. I became youth director of Operation Breadbasket in New York when I was 13. And I remember we had a sit-in at A&P. We were boycotting A&P, and I was youth director under Reverend William Jones and Jesse Jackson and Ralph Abernathy. And they came to New York during the sit-in, and I was arrested. And Gil was there, first time that I ever was involved in that. So he kind of literally watched me grow. And then a couple of years later, he started Like It Is. He was just a reporter. And so I grew up under Gil. And I say that to say because I would find myself sometime going to ABC to talk to Gil, not as a reporter, but for advice. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And he would always was generous with his time and had a way of critiquing you without offending you. So he wouldn't say, well, don't be so bombastic. He'd say, why don't you try this approach? He wouldn't say, well, I don't think you studied that enough. He'd say, why don't you try reading this? Have you ever thought about this? And he did something I've never talked about in public. He would give me tapes of all of the Like It Is stuff that he did, some that never reached the air. I was a huge admirer of Adam Clayton Powell. And Gil did probably the most extensive interview with Adam Clayton Powell. I always felt Adam Clayton Powell never got the credit he was due for the work he did in civil rights and in Congress. And Powell did an interview with Gil when his book Adam came out. And Gil gave me some of the footage of that, and I treasure it to this day. So for Gil Noble to go from Adam Clayton Powell and Shirley Chisholm to Barack Obama and be on the cutting edge for that long is something no journalist in the history of this country comes even close to. Gil Noble didn't cover Adam and cover Malcolm and cover Dr. King all the way through Jesse Jackson and Louis Farrakhan to me and my generation. He knew us all. He knew our strengths and our weaknesses. He knew our flaws. He knew what was good and bad. He understood everybody's personalities. He understood our detractors. He understood where they were right and wrong. And he just told it like it is anyway. I think that the fact that this tribute is on the day that the first black president will be dedicating a memorial to Martin Luther King, the first that will have a memorial like that on the banks of the Potomac, is really the Gil Noble story. Here's something that was unlikely. Martin Luther King never held office, never was a president, to be having a memorial where he's standing there looking across at Lincoln, Jefferson, and Washington, and did it on his own terms. And because he did it, there's a black man and black family in the White House who comes to dedicate it. It's like Gil standing up in mainstream New York media on his own terms, in his own way, like Dr. King did, and never, ever compromise. It's also on the anniversary of the Million Man March, because in New York, we had a Million Man March every Sunday, with Like It Is.
Mako gave my old car a fantastic paint job. My son drives it now.
Mako keeps my fleet looking new. They fix all kinds of damage.
But getting my car fixed is such a hassle.
Not with Mako. They make it fast, easy, and convenient.
My car looks great again, and to think I kept putting it off.
With Mako, there's no excuse not to get your car fixed, and it's best done now.
For a limited time, Mako will paint your bumper for only $149. Visit your local Mako center today. Whatever your better get Mako.
We're back, and we're honoring our Channel 7 public affairs show, Like It Is. Gil Noble was adamant about sharing African-American history with his viewers. Here's a glimpse of some of the historical footage that we all will long remember.
The world today is controlled by black people and colored people. Out of the 3 billion people in the world today, 2,500,000,000 are colored. And these colored people are saying, don't talk to us about a free world, and don't talk to us about following your leadership, as long as you got our colored people in Cambridge, Maryland, not able to buy a cup of coffee in a cheap little lunch counter.
Adam Clayton Powell, Jr., America's second black congressman since Reconstruction. In his 26-year career in Congress, a stormy, controversial career, he put through more legislation than any other congressman. And at the same time, he was pastor of the Abyssinia Baptist Church. This is his story. And the prime connecting tissue of this documentary that you're about to see is an interview that we at Like It Is were fortunate enough to do with him just before he died. So you were born and raised in New York.
Correct.
You lived all your life in Harlem.
Lived in Harlem all my life. I'm a Harlem boy. Then I started picketing for blacks to have jobs in Harlem and coined the phrase which swept the country, don't buy where you can't work. And won every single fight. On 25th Street, had 2 blacks working. One was a maid, Consolidated Edison. Another was a cleaner working for Bloom's Times.
So because of your activism in many areas of the Harlem community, I guess this sort of made you a natural candidate for political office.
Yes.
At birth, he was named Malcolm Little. He rose to worldwide attention with the name Malcolm X. He died with the name El-Haj Malik El-Shabazz. The picket demonstrations in the South continued to escalate, and so did the development of the Nation of Islam, developing particularly in Harlem, where large crowds were now turning out to hear this fiery young man who had an extraordinary way with words and ideas.
Right in this country, under your nose, with 2-legged white dogs, sticking 4-legged dogs on your and my mother, you and I don't know how to fight. Sticking dogs on your and my sister, and you and I don't know how to fight. Sticking dogs on our children and dogs on our babies, and you don't know how to fight. You can't fight nor bark until the white man say bark or fight. In the South, you are segregated by that dog. In the North, you integrated with this dog. And it's no different.
Dr. King was a man of love, sincerity, and strength. Truly, he had an amazing grace.
I stand in Montgomery tonight. I am impelled to think about some of
of these developments